What is up to all of my little unicorns, new and old? It's your girl WestIndieRay, back again with another information-filled video. In my last video, 12 tips toward divine alignment and living authentically, I spoke a little bit about judgment. More specifically, the non-judgmental journey that I have been extremely intentional about since the beginning of 2022. I spoke about how this little sub-journey helps me feel more aligned in my big scheme journey of my life's path. And I also spoke about how being intentional about that journey, which originally in my mind started outwardly, like I started trying to be less judgmental to other people. I spoke about how I actually ended up becoming less judgmental to myself as well throughout the process of that journey, which of course I'm still on because life is a journey. And I don't know why I didn't think of that, because as Hermes once said, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. I've known that principle for a long time, so I don't know why I didn't see it coming, but it completely cracked my world open and I've been living a better life since being intentional about this. So let this just be a base level of things that I did that you are free to expand upon in your own life, just as I will continue to expand upon these ideas in mine. Because of that last video and the snippets that I posted online, I got a bunch of questions on how this journey really began in my head as an intentional thing that I was going to do. And also, what are some of the things that I've implemented in my everyday life that help me stay in alignment with empathy and acceptance rather than going down the path of unnecessary judgment. So I'm just gonna share some of those things with you guys today. I believe I have a list of 7. What I can say about most, if not all, principles that I have become intentional about is that it all starts with me realizing that I have the option. It starts with me realizing that there are choices that I have been making, but there are also a load of other choices out there that lead to different versions of reality. And then from there, I just get curious about what could my life possibly look like if I maybe chose to go another way rather than what I've always been doing? Where have my current choices that I have been so consistent with gotten me up until this point? And is there a reality out there that I prefer? My personal thing is that I always ask for ease in my life. And one of the ways that I complement that energy and continue to invite it into my life is by introspection. Being extremely introspective helps me catch on to things really early rather than giving them the opportunity to fester and then manifest in whatever way in order for me to become back in alignment with my life's path. Not to say that being introspective means that your life is perfect, but it just increases your understanding of yourself. It helps for me to deal with situations better internally and externally because I've already thought about it. That takes a little bit of work sometimes, because for people who have never really exercised that, you know, with any muscle that you have that you haven't really exercised, it's gonna feel a little weak at first. It's gonna be a little bit of a struggle. But as you continue to get those reps in and strengthen that muscle, things get a lot easier. I imagine introspection as kind of like the phone line between where I stand in this moment and all the different possibilities that I could choose to align with. After I take inventory of a situation and am able to pinpoint certain areas that don't really feel like they're in alignment with me, I then use my intelligence, my discernment, my critical thinking skills, and all the other tools at my disposal to really make choices that I feel are in alignment with the high frequency thoughts and experiences that I see as better options for me. So put simply, I became intentional on this journey just by realizing that it was an option that I wanted to align with. That's it, that's all. I also want to be clear in what I mean when I say judgment or judgmental. I don't mean in the sense of take everything into consideration and make the best decision possible given the circumstances. I don't mean in a critical thinking way, like the kind that's really necessary in everyday life. But what I'm talking about when I say judgment and being judgmental in this context, it's the type of judgment that distracts people from the beauty that they could be enjoying in their own lives or even using to elevate their life or even the lives of others. Those negative thoughts that creep into your brain that you get fixated on instead of just letting them go. Because honestly, the option to just let them go is always there. The ones that come to you when you're not minding your business enough or when you're overthinking about how you show up in the world, those are the thoughts that I'm talking about. And I also want to say, although I might say non-judgmental or whatever, and I just throw that word around, what I really mean is less judgmental. And I want to be intentional about making that point. I try my best to make sure that I am not in a linear timeline. So for me, there's no destination of being non-judgmental where once you get there, that's it. It is a journey for me, just like any other aspect of my life. So I want to really make it a point to say less judgmental instead of non-judgmental. So now that we all hopefully have an understanding of what it is, what I mean when I talk about judgment, and also my personal process on how I start on these paths of intentional learning, now I want to get into the things that I have implemented in my daily life that have really helped me. So the first thing on my list that that has been really helpful for me when it comes to being less judgmental is to examine my personal prejudices and kind of get to the root of where those things came from. The world is full of messages and programming that to me does not seem to only impact the individual as they're consuming it. I believe that this programming also helps to kind of create a common narrative between all the other people who are plugged into this experience of the world. These messages might seem normal, they might even seem eternal. And when I say eternal, I mean it might feel like they have always existed, that they have always been there. That type of mindset where it's like, this is how things are, this is how things have always been, and things are not going to change, which to me seems very limiting. And along with this messaging and the way that it already affects the collective conscious simply by existing, it seems as if people are also being herded to believe and accept them as truth. So it is very important, in my opinion, to do something that I like to call authenticity check, which is something that you may have heard me talk about before. How I do this is by calling on my highest energy, and I take the time to really sit with myself and ask my spirit how I really feel about specific situations, rather than just relying on the pre-programming that I got when I came to this earth. I examine my thoughts and emotions regardless of how closely connected I feel to them, especially the ones that feel particularly knee-jerk or reactionary. You can do this as the thoughts come into your mind, which I do often, like in my everyday life, but I also set aside time specifically just to think. And if it doesn't feel authentic to me, I go even deeper and try to identify the point in which I accepted those thoughts and ideas as my personal truth. And once I get to that point to where I see like, okay, this is the moment, or these are the moments, or these are the beliefs, or these things were told to me when I was little before I built that muscle of discernment or critical thinking. Once I realize that these things are not in alignment with me, it becomes pretty obvious how separate these thoughts and ideas are from me personally, and also from my life's divine path. And that just puts me in the perfect place to watch those thoughts pass by rather than internalizing them and fixating on them. And just like nature, what you don't water will struggle to grow. The next thing that I love to do that really helps me is intentionally rewiring my brain for radical optimism. Trigger warning, I'm about to talk about the transition of a loved one. If that's something that you are not in the place to hear right now, please make use of the chapters that I have in this video and skip to the next chapter. So when my mother first passed away, I was actually there in the room. Some of you guys already know like a brief outline of this story, but I was actually kissing my mother at the moment that she passed away. That has been such a beautiful thing for me to experience. It's like the best parting gift that I could have really received. But at the same time, it was very difficult for me mentally. At first, my mind, whenever I would think of my mom, would automatically route to that moment and that image. And because of the fact that I promised her that I would not blame her for the transition and for her transitioning in the way that she needed to, because I gave her permission to do that, I had to come up with a different narrative for myself that wasn't about the negative things that happened from her passing. So what that looked like for me during that time was envisioning that my mind had a switch, and I am the operator of that switch. Every time that thought would pop into my head, I trained myself to automatically switch to an image of her that I adored. I definitely did not want to ignore what I was going through or like bypass my grief and my pain. I did this so that I could take the suffering aspect out of my pain. As Maryam Hasnaa says, which I really love her content. Definitely make sure that you check her out. I'm actually a part of her online mystery school, and it's super fulfilling for me up until this point. So I'll leave a link because I want to put y'all on. That situation in and of itself taught me so many things. Actually, most of what I put out on my social media is because of things that I've learned from that situation, or downloads that my mom gave me after she transitioned, or even while she was here earthside. But until this day, one of the most beneficial things it taught me was that my mind could actually do something like that. That I could actually rewire my mind in such a way. Like, I had no idea that I had the ability to do that until I was placed in a situation to where, you know, I had choices, and that choice became clear to me. It happened in the perfect time for me, for my life. I learned that way. My hope for you is that you can hear this and just start playing with the concept in your mind. And what better way to practice than what we're talking about right now, being less judgmental. So how does all of this relate to judgment? It might not be that visual in your head to where it's a certain image that you keep seeing and you replace it with another image that you would prefer seeing. It's more of a switch between a critical mindset to a curious one. In moments where I would, let's say, see somebody walking down the street and judge their outfit, instead of being critical of them and being like, girl, why he got that on? Or like, what made her walk out the house like that today? I might instead become curious of their expression in this world and wonder, how does that make them feel? I wonder how that jacket, how that trench coat make them feel. I wonder what them shoes doing for her. Instead, I would much rather have those types of thoughts than to be constantly judging somebody for something that doesn't even matter. I could even choose to let that experience prompt me to explore how I can add more confidence and more authenticity, more free self-expression into my own life. But this is simply about identifying what thoughts that actually add to my life and actively choosing to go down those rabbit holes rather than the more critical ones. Another thing that I do that you guys might have heard me speak a little bit about before is thinking in the affirmative or existing in the affirmative. I know people say all the time that you should like speak to yourself positively and you should practice positive self-talk. Well, this is like that on steroids. I've just recognized that there is a reality to where the person that I am in my everyday life, walking around, interacting with people, talking to myself all day, there is a reality out there to where that person is not in a constant state of correction. And I just like to sit in that knowing and allow it to spread to all the little creaks and crevices of my life. One way that I do this is by intentionally teaching myself to see beauty in everything as a first response. Of course, there are certain things that are like atrocities and abominations, not stuff like that. Like, stay on this level with me. As I continue to get better at rerouting my brain whenever I don't want to just reroute it like I said. I want to replace that first response with something else. So how this looks for me in like an everyday life application is to ask myself often, what do you like about that? And I allow that thought to set the tone for the rest of the thoughts that I have about that particular thing, person, or self. And as I go up and up and up and up and up and up and up in that frequency, it just becomes way easier to where it's like a first reaction rather than a corrective behavior. It has helped me so much to be intentional about it and also just to introduce myself to the thought that it exists and that I can have it. The next thing that has helped me so much on this journey towards becoming less judgmental is prioritizing empathy and learning. Maybe I'm learning about a new person, a new lifestyle, a new idea. And let me be clear, I'm not talking about internalizing or taking. I'm talking about just observing and learning. One way that I like to include this into my life is by asking open-ended questions to people and actually listening to understand what they have to say. Sometimes it might not even be a person. Sometimes it might be something that I'm just observing. Either way, being open-minded really helps me a lot with that aspect of judgment that thrives off of assumption and or ignorance. The next thing for me that has really impacted me is forgiving myself for any regrets that I've had in the past and letting go of shame. Heavy on the shame, because oftentimes shame is one of those things that doesn't even have to be because of your own doing. Realizing that those experiences are things that I have been through rather than things that I have to bring with me through the rest of my life has been a complete game changer for me. If you guys want a more in-depth video about my journey with shame and how I've been releasing it from myself, definitely put that in the comment as well. But in doing that, I realized it became a lot easier for me to just let people live even through their mistakes and faults. Through the work of freeing myself in that way, it's become so much easier to allow different versions of people to come and go in my mind without always feeling the need to anchor them down to the past. And that has helped me so much when it comes to being less judgmental. The next thing is also something that I talk about quite frequently, and it is having an eternal perspective. And in that eternal perspective, realizing what is the most efficient way to go upon this journey of life that I'm in right now? How can I use my time wisely? Especially when you think about how much there actually is to do in this world, in this experience that we're having right now, and how much business is really out there needing somebody to mind it, and we just refuse to mind it. I don't know what that's about, but it's not really in alignment with what I think of when I think about having an eternal perspective. Next time that you catch yourself in the midst of making judgments, ask yourself, how much does this really matter in the grand scheme of things? Like in all of creation, in all of the world and space and time, how much does this matter? And if you're anything like me, I feel like you might realize pretty quickly that these things don't matter nearly as much as the time that we spend on them. I have just come to the conclusion that I would rather use my energy to make my life feel as fulfilling as possible as I fulfill my mission, my life purpose and all that. That one has also helped me a lot in my day-to-day, especially when it comes to the things that I allow myself to get upset or like triggered about. Sometimes I just have to sit and be like, okay, why is this taking up space in my mind again? Why am I fixated on this thought? Does it really matter? And the answer be no, y'all. The answer be no. I say that all the time, but the answer be no. So why are we doing it? But now that we have the language and we're able to identify it, we can start to make those choices. And the last thing I'm going to say is to allow people to mind their own business, which for me has helped me remove the judgmental eye from my mind. And what I mean by the judgmental eye, like I picture it as like similarly to how people think of rose-colored glasses, like regardless of how terrible the relationship is, how bad the living situation was, how much you actually hated that city or that job while you were there, the rose-colored glasses will kind of just make everything look nice and pretty and just as if it was part of a fantasy, right? To me, I think of the judgmental eye in that same type of fashion, but kind of like the critical version. One of my favorite rappers, Smino, said, "Making up haters in your mind sound like self-hate to me. Imagine everybody love and that's what you gon' see." And that is facts. Same as I was saying before, if you are expectant of all that hate and energy, that is what you are going to be operating in to a certain extent. And my goal in my life is to eradicate it. I have decided that the universe in its entirety is always conspiring in my favor for my highest good. So a person's fleeting thought about me that they may or may not be having, and even if they were having it, they won't be having it tomorrow. They're not gonna go to sleep with it on their mind or wake up with it on their mind. That carries no weight. Rather than getting caught up in that reactionary state to where a simple look from a person can change my frequency as a being, I wanna constantly be in the headspace to where my first thought is, dang, they was staring off to space and I just happened to be in that direction. What a little coinky-dink, regardless of the fact that I don't believe in coincidences. That's how unfamiliar I want judgmental energy to feel for me, which not only helps me by allowing me to assume positive things about the energy that I receive throughout the course of my life, but it also helps me get out of the idea that unnecessary judgment is something that everybody does, and it helps me not to normalize it, if that makes sense. Because again, once I can see that the reality exists, I can then align with it in my own personal life. So that is the end of the video. My 7 tips to being less judgmental in my everyday life that I use and that I am continuing to grow and develop. I, again, encourage you to grow and develop these ideas for yourself. Please let me know if that all made sense to you, because like I always say, if it didn't make sense, leave me a comment and I will try again to explain it using different words. As usual, if you made it to this point in the video, make sure to leave me a little unicorn in the comment section below as well. And always like, subscribe, comment, and share. Follow all my social media accounts right down there, and I'll see you in the next video.